So, here's what just happened. And honestly, no one saw this coming. Inside that courtroom, where silence usually rules, something snapped.
It wasn't just tension. It was him, Diddy. The moment that final unreleased track from Prince played over the courtroom speakers, the entire room froze.
You could feel the weight of it. Like air thick with something you can't quite explain. Diddy's expression changed. Not in a small, subtle way. No, it was like watching someone get hit by something they thought they buried long ago.
People who were in the room, they're saying his reaction wasn't just emotional. It was explosive. He lost it. Right there, in front of everyone.
But here's the thing. This moment wasn't random. It was calculated, strategic. That song, it was brought in for a reason, because tied to that final recording, buried under layers of sound and legacy, is a truth someone wanted the court and the world to hear.
Diddy? He wasn't ready for it. Now you might be wondering, why Prince? Why now? What connection does his last recording have to this trial? And more importantly, why did it crack Diddy the way it did? We'll get there. Because once you understand what that song means, not just musically, but legally, things start to make sense in a way that's actually disturbing.
But first, let's rewind a bit. Because this trial, it's not just about headlines and celebrity chaos. This is years of tension, secrets, and power struggles finally colliding in one courtroom. And when that happens, you get moments like this. Raw, unscripted, and impossible to ignore. Day 3 kicked off just like the ones before it. Reporters flooded in early, hoping for the best spots. Celebs slid through side doors, heads low, sunglasses on. Legal teams shuffled papers like they'd done it 1,000 times. But this morning, something felt off. The energy in the room didn't just hum, it buzzed. More security guards than usual were stationed around the courtroom. 4 of them, not 2, stood right behind Diddy's table. They hadn't been there the day before. Someone later said the court staff got special instructions that morning. No one explained why, but the reason would soon become clear.
Diddy walked in cool as ever, impeccable navy suit, smooth smile. He nodded to a few people in the gallery, looking like the man still in charge. His legal team hovered around him, whispering tightly rehearsed strategies. He looked confident, like someone who still believed he could control the narrative. But across the aisle, something was happening. The prosecution had quietly brought in 2 tech guys, new faces. They were setting up equipment that wasn't there earlier in the week. They plugged things in, whispered to the lead prosecutor, then glanced, again and again, at Diddy. They knew something, and whatever it wasn't good news for him. One reporter later told me that people were texting each other across the room, asking the same thing. What is the prosecution about to drop? Everyone could feel it. Something big was coming.
Then the judge walked in. He did the usual roll call, reminded everyone to behave, but then paused. "No matter what evidence is presented today," he said, "I expect this courtroom to remain composed." He looked out at the gallery and then added, "Any disruption will result in immediate removal." You could hear people shift in their seats. The prosecution's opening words felt routine. For a minute, they started by reviewing earlier testimony, stitching the story together piece by piece. But then, right in the middle of a sentence, the lead prosecutor stopped. "Your Honor," she said, "at this time, we'd like to introduce newly authenticated audio evidence." She held up a small black device as she approached the bench. The defense team immediately objected, claiming they hadn't been warned about this recording. A sidebar erupted. Diddy's lawyers gestured wildly, voices raised just enough to catch attention.
But after a short, heated exchange, the judge ruled. The evidence had been properly disclosed. The prosecution could move forward. And that's when everything changed. The prosecutor turned, faced the room, and said the words that flipped everything upside down. What you're about to hear is the final private recording made by Prince Rogers Nelson before his death. The courtroom, completely still. Reporters froze mid-typing. Some literally gasped. All eyes turned toward Diddy. And the color drained from his face instantly. His attorney gripped his arm. Diddy didn't even blink, just stared ahead, locked in place. His legal team pressed in tighter, whispering in a panic as the techs connected the device to the courtroom speakers. And even before a single word played, the tension snapped. Something in that room shifted. It was like everyone knew what was coming. Everyone except Diddy.
He looked terrified. And then, Prince's voice, clear, calm, but unlike anything we'd ever heard from him before. A woman in the third row quietly covered her mouth. She started to cry. Not because of nostalgia, but because of how he sounded. This wasn't the Prince the world knew. Not the confident icon, the showman. No. This was a man afraid. He spoke slowly, almost like he was choosing every word with caution. I'm making this recording because I don't know who to trust anymore. He began. You could hear his breath between sentences. He wasn't performing. He wasn't telling a story. He was confessing something real. And then came the moment that shattered everything. Prince began naming names, giving specific dates, describing exact places. And right at the center of it all, Diddy.
And Diddy, he crumbled. That confident stare he walked in with, gone. His eyes widened. His hands clutched the table. His lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically. But Diddy didn't move, just kept staring forward, like he was watching his world collapse in real time. Prince's voice grew sharper. What happens at those parties isn't just wrong, it's criminal, he said. I've seen what goes on. I know who gets hurt. Every word felt like a direct hit. And here's what made it even more devastating. Prince didn't just support the prosecution's claims, he validated them. As someone who'd been inside, behind the curtain. And he wasn't alive to be discredited. No one could twist his testimony. No one could pressure him to change it. He talked about a party in December 2015. Named guests, some of whom had denied even being there. Then, he described the rooms upstairs. The exact same setup the prosecution outlined on day one.
The entire courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward. Prince then said something that made everyone stiffen. I confronted him. I told him this needed to stop. He laughed in my face. Right then, the prosecutor hit pause on the recording. And in that perfectly timed silence, every single person turned to Diddy. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. One of his lawyers slid a yellow notepad in front of him, probably to block the jury from seeing his reaction. Too late. Everyone had already seen it. That smile he walked in with, gone. That control he always had, gone. In seconds, Prince had shattered the image Diddy had spent years crafting, without ever stepping foot in that courtroom. What made this moment so heavy wasn't just the fact that Prince was speaking, it was what he knew. He started talking about why he began recording things in the first place.
He said, I stopped taking big checks for record labels after my third album. I paid for the studio time. I produced everything. I owned it. He sounded calm, but there was an edge to it, like someone who'd been burned more than once. And when those labels told him, well, you signed the contract, his response was, I get it, but let's talk. Let's make it fair. But they never did. They don't want fairness, Prince said. If they change how it works, they stop existing. That's the truth. He wasn't angry, just matter of fact, like a man who's seen too much and stopped hoping for justice. He even used a metaphor. Not flashy, just smart. If they're just a delivery service, fine. But even FedEx doesn't say they own what they ship. That quiet intensity kept building. Then came the part everyone had been waiting for. Cassie. She'd been on the stand for 4 days straight. And this morning, the defense had gone in hard.
Trying to paint her as eager, willing, even obsessed with a lifestyle. They read her old texts aloud to the court. Graphic ones. Things like, I'm always ready to freak off. Stuff that was meant to suggest she was a full participant. The goal? Show the jury this wasn't abuse. It was just an unconventional relationship between two consenting adults. And yeah, some of those messages didn't help her case, at least not on the surface. But people who really understand trauma, they know that context matters. That just because someone said something in 2009 during the honeymoon phase doesn't mean they weren't manipulated, controlled, or scared out of their mind later. At that time, she was young. She was living in a fantasy world. Diddy, money, glamour, the lifestyle. She probably thought saying the right things would keep the dream going. But when you pull back and really look at the timeline, you start seeing the cracks.
The texts the defense showed were from the early days. But over time, the tone changed. And that matters. Then Prince's voice came back. And what he said next changed everything. He said this recording came from his private vault. It had never been meant for the public. He made it just a few weeks before he died. Because, in his words, he didn't feel safe. You could hear chairs creak as people leaned in. The prosecutor clarified. Prince recorded this for protection, to document what he saw with his own eyes. And the effect in the courtroom? Immediate. This wasn't some old rumor. This was first-person testimony, preserved by someone who knew how dangerous it all was. When Prince's voice came back through the speakers, everything in that room felt different. He started giving specifics, not vague guesses or secondhand stories. He described events, names, dates, places.
Right in the middle of all of it, Diddy. He talked about parties at Diddy's Beverly Hills property. He didn't just say there was a party. He named the exact address, the layout of the rooms, the things that happened behind closed doors. The same house, the same details, the exact same setup prosecutors had already mentioned earlier in the trial. And every word coming from that speaker was cutting Diddy to pieces. Prince said, "What happens at these parties? It's not just about excess. It's calculated." And then came the line that had people shifting in their chairs. I saw him isolate young artists, pull them away from their teams, get them alone, put them in situations where they couldn't say no. That wasn't an accusation. That was a warning. One Prince had hoped someone would eventually hear. He didn't stop there. He described how some of those young artists came to these gatherings thinking this was their chance.
Their moment to break into the industry. But by the time they realized what was really going on, it was already too late. Prince said he personally saw at least 7 artists go through it. 7. And just when the room thought it couldn't get more intense, Prince dropped another bomb. He confronted Diddy. Directly. He said it happened at a Grammy after-party in 2016. Prince told him to stop, that people were getting hurt. And Diddy, he laughed. "You might be Prince," he said, "but you're not untouchable." Prince said he took that as a threat. And honestly, who wouldn't? The prosecutors let that part sit there in the air for a second. Then the recording kept going. Prince talked about money, payments, big ones. $2 million to one person, $1.3 million to another. And not just loose numbers, exact figures that matched financial documents already entered into evidence.
He said, "I've seen the payments. I've seen the NDAs. This isn't just bad behavior. This is organized, intentional." And the way he spoke, it wasn't dramatic, it was methodical. Prince had receipts. He'd been documenting this stuff for years. He said, "I keep records, dates, times, who was there, what happened. I've been doing this since 2007. Even seasoned legal experts in the room were stunned. This wasn't casual commentary. This was a logbook. A time-stamped archive from someone who knew exactly how powerful people in the industry operate and how they cover their tracks. And while all this was playing, Diddy just sat there, still, silent. Except now, he was trembling. Prince's voice was still playing, steady, clear, and every word kept slicing through whatever composure Diddy had left. He was hunched forward now, eyes darting, breathing harder. Even from the back row, people could see his shoulders rising and falling, like he couldn't catch his breath.
Then Prince mentioned a private gathering, Beverly Hills again, a specific date, March 9th, 2016, and then an address. One the prosecutors had already connected to Diddy's name. That's when it happened. Diddy stood up, not slowly, not like someone easing out of a seat. He just shot up like he'd been yanked by a wire. Every head in the room snapped toward him, and so did the guards. 4 officers immediately closed in on the defense table. Diddy's lawyers were visibly panicking now, trying to pull him back down, whispering furiously. One even stepped between him and the jury box like a human shield. But the recording didn't stop. Prince described walking into a room, and what he saw there matched word for word the charges laid out against Diddy. You could see the defense team scrambling. One lawyer practically climbed over the others, trying to calm Diddy down. It was chaos. And then, the moment no one could believe, Diddy snapped.
"That's a lie!" he shouted, loud enough that a reporter in the front row actually flinched. "He wasn't there! That never happened!" His voice echoed through the courtroom. Gasps. Real ones. The judge banged the gavel instantly. "Order! Mr. Combs, control yourself or I will hold you in contempt." But the damage was done. The jury had seen it all. And here's the kicker. While Diddy was yelling, Prince's voice never stopped playing. It kept rolling underneath the chaos. Unbothered. Unshaken. Because nothing Diddy said could silence it now. And that's exactly what the prosecution wanted. This wasn't just a lucky break. It was strategy, precision. They'd been holding that recording like a secret weapon, waiting until Diddy felt safe, waiting until he thought he had control of the room. Then boom, they dropped it, and he blew up.
After Diddy's explosion, the room was locked in a kind of stunned silence. You could feel the shift, like everyone knew they had just witnessed the turning point of the entire trial. And the prosecution? They were ready. Once the judge restored order, the recording continued. Prince's voice rolled on, calm, steady, unstoppable. But now, every word hit harder, because Diddy had just confirmed what the prosecution hoped the jury would see. That beneath the designer suits and cool exterior, something was cracking. What Prince said next made it even worse. He accused Diddy of carefully documenting financial agreements meant to silence people. Not rumors, not hearsay, actual numbers. Prince said, "I've seen the payments, I've seen the NDAs, I know who got what and why." He listed amounts. $2 million here, $1.3 million there, and every number matched earlier evidence already submitted by the prosecution. You could see some jurors blink hard.
They weren't just watching testimony, they were connecting dots in real time. And Diddy? He looked like a man trapped inside his own skin, sweating, shaking. His legal team tried to pass him a glass of water. He didn't take it. One lawyer slid a legal pad into his hands, probably hoping to give him something to focus on. But his grip was so weak, the pad just drooped. By late afternoon, he looked ill, pale, lost, like all the energy had drained from his body. Then came the final strike of the day. His attorneys, clearly desperate, filed an emergency motion. They wanted Prince's recording thrown out, claimed it was impossible to verify since the man who made it was no longer alive. Legal analysts in the courtroom weren't fooled for a second. "This is pure panic," one whispered to a colleague. "They know they can't walk this back. Emergency motions don't get filed unless you're cornered." And Diddy's team, they were out of options.
The judge denied the motion without blinking. Court would continue. One of the prosecutors leaned over to her colleague and smiled, just slightly. Not smug, but knowing. This was the moment they'd been building toward for months, and it landed harder than they could have hoped. Even court security reacted. 2 more officers stepped up and stood closer to Diddy's table. One of them stood right behind his chair, close enough to grab him if he made another move. Jurors couldn't unsee what had just happened. 3 of them watched Diddy like hawks for the rest of the session, studying his every twitch. The judge told them to ignore the outburst. "Emotions are not evidence," he said. But anyone who's been in a courtroom knows, once a jury feels something, you can't unfeel it. From that point on, the courtroom wasn't just focused, it was gripped. The prosecution didn't waste the moment. They pressed forward, calmly connecting every thread Prince had just laid out.
They showed the financial records that matched the payouts Prince described. They brought up text messages from other witnesses. Texts that matched the same dates, same people, same locations he'd mentioned. It was airtight. Prince's voice wasn't floating in a vacuum, it was now backed by paper trails, screenshots, and verified documents. Diddy just sat there, soaked in sweat, trapped in a courtroom he no longer controlled. His hand shook so visibly that one of his attorneys actually tried to steady him by sliding over that same yellow notepad again. He didn't touch it. By mid-afternoon, he looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Gone was the smooth operator with the navy suit and polished smile. What remained was someone unraveling at the seams. And just when you thought the prosecution would ease up, they landed one last hit before the day ended.
They had Prince saying it plainly, "I'm making this recording because I'm scared. I know how the power in his business works. People like him, they're protected." And then came the sentence that froze the room one last time. "If anything happens to me, make sure this gets to the right people. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's too afraid to speak." When Prince's voice finally faded to silence, no one moved. No one dared to. Even reporters, usually first to jump into motion, just stared forward, stunned. People didn't whisper. They didn't check their phones. It was like time had stopped. Then the lead prosecutor stood up and said, "No further questions, Your Honor." That was it. She didn't have to explain, she didn't have to argue. Because Prince, who never got to take the stand, had just done something no living witness could. He testified without fear, and no one could interrupt him. No one could intimidate him. No one could spin his words.
He spoke with clarity, he spoke with specifics, and he spoke with the weight of someone who knew he might not live to see the fallout. But now, his words had landed. And they landed like a bomb. Even after the judge adjourned for the day, no one rushed out. People just sat there, stunned, processing. You could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing down on everyone in that room. And it wasn't just about what Prince had said. It was about watching Diddy fall apart in real time after holding it together so carefully, so strategically, for the first 2 days. Up until then, he'd seemed untouchable, cool, composed, untouched by all the accusations flying at him. Even when witnesses pointed fingers, even when uncomfortable images showed up on the court screens, he kept calm. But Prince's voice cracked something open, and once it happened, there was no going back.
Even the court sketch artist, someone who sat through dozens of trials, said afterwards she'd never seen such a dramatic shift in someone's body language. It was like watching a mask fall off, she told reporters. Jurors noticed too. They leaned in. Some took furious notes. Others just stared, as if trying to memorize every movement Diddy made. And then there were the families. Cassie Ventura had her brother and husband sitting in the gallery. Her husband, Alex Fine, was there again, glasses on, focused, sitting close to the screen when text messages were shown. You could tell he was absorbing every single word. Cassie herself had been on the stand for 4 straight days. She was expected to wrap up tomorrow, if nothing else delayed it. That was the plan. But everyone knew, after today, nothing was going to go exactly as planned anymore. The judge clearly wanted her testimony to end soon, probably to avoid dragging her through more trauma.
But what she'd already shared, it was enough to shake anyone. There were moments where she described a lifestyle that blurred into control, coercion, and emotional chaos. She admitted conversations about swinging, about being asked to watch him with other women. She said it only happened a few times, but he brought it up constantly. And then there was Kim Porter. The defense used her name to drive home one theme: jealousy. They were trying to show that Cassie wasn't a victim. She was just in love. And love, they argued, made her possessive, emotional. They asked her straight out if she was jealous of Kim Porter. Cassie paused, thought, then admitted yes. It bothered her knowing Diddy spent holidays with Kim and their children. That moment said a lot, because it painted the relationship not just as toxic, but real, complicated, messy. Not a made-up story for a lawsuit, but something with real love, real heartbreak, and real consequences.
And while everyone was trying to process all of that, you also had Diddy's own children sitting quietly behind him. 2 of the girls were seen leaving the courtroom in tears. And honestly, who could blame them? Whatever you think about Diddy, those are kids hearing graphic, painful details about their father, about his private life, about the man they thought they knew. They lost their mother, and now they were watching their father being stripped bare in public. This trial isn't just hard on the celebrities. It's ripping through entire families on both sides. It only took 7 seconds. That's how long it took for everything to fall apart. The moment Prince's recording cut off and Diddy lost it, yelling in open court, the entire tone of this trial flipped. His lawyers, they jumped into full crisis mode. No hesitation. The lead attorney stood immediately. His voice was shaking as he asked the judge for a 15-minute recess.
"We need to consult with our client," he said, trying to sound calm. But the desperation was all over his face. The judge didn't even flinch. "Denied," he said firmly. "We will continue with the evidence." Then he looked Diddy straight in the eye. "I expect no further disruptions." Boom, that was it. Diddy's team was stunned. These are the kind of lawyers who usually get what they ask for. They charge $1,500 an hour and walk into courtrooms expecting control. But not today. Today they were losing, fast. Meanwhile, the prosecution? They didn't need to gloat, but the look they exchanged said it all. One of the prosecutors, the second chair, even gave a tiny smile the second Diddy shouted. Just a flicker. It said, "We got him." And they did. This wasn't luck. It was a trap, one they built brick by brick and sprung at the perfect moment.
They waited for him to get comfortable, waited until he believed the worst was behind him. Then they played the only thing that could tear down everything he'd built. A voice he couldn't argue with, couldn't dismiss, couldn't bury. A veteran legal analyst, 2 rows behind, whispered to his colleague. This just broke the defense in half. He spent 2 days trying to look calm and innocent. Now, the jury's watching him spiral. Even though the judge told jurors to disregard the outburst, Every trial lawyer knows. Once a jury sees something, you can't ask them to unsee it. 3 of them were now laser-locked on Diddy. Every breath, every fidget, watching. Court security wasn't taking chances either. 2 more guards moved in closer, posted just feet from Diddy's table. One stood directly behind his chair, close enough to grab him if needed. It was subtle, but it sent a message. The rest of the afternoon, brutal.
The prosecution just kept stacking evidence on top of Prince's words. Payment receipts, screenshots, testimonies that mirrored what Prince had described. All of it synced perfectly. And Diddy? He sat there sweating through his luxury suit, his hands visibly trembling. At one point, an assistant offered him a bottle of water. He waved it off. By the time court was about to adjourn, he looked like he could barely sit upright. Whatever edge he had walking in that morning, gone. This wasn't just a bad day in court. This was a full collapse. The courtroom settled back into tense silence, but the damage was done. Behind the scenes, the prosecution was quietly celebrating. They didn't just catch Diddy off guard. They orchestrated this moment with ruthless precision. Weeks before, they'd laid down the groundwork, patiently gathering every piece of evidence that would fit perfectly into this puzzle.
Every receipt, every text, every witness was a carefully placed brick in the wall closing in around him. They knew they needed something explosive to shake the defense and sway the jury. Prince's recording wasn't a random gamble. It was the final, decisive strike, and it worked. Diddy's collapse wasn't just about losing his temper. It showed cracks that had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. The prosecution had cracked open his facade, and now the jury saw the man behind the mask. A defense that seemed unshakable was starting to crumble in real time. As the day wore on, the prosecution tightened their grip, methodically connecting every dot. Each new piece of evidence wasn't just information. It was a story, one that painted Diddy as someone desperately trying to cover his tracks. The defense scrambled to respond, but the momentum was slipping through their fingers.
By the time the judge called a break, the mood in the courtroom was unmistakable. This trial wasn't just about facts anymore. It was about a man's reputation unraveling right before everyone's eyes. And for those watching, the question wasn't just if Diddy would be found guilty. It was how far this fall would go. If you think this moment was intense, wait until you see what the prosecution pulls out next. The next chapter exposes the calculated moves they made behind closed doors. Moves so clever, Diddy never saw them coming. Keep your eyes peeled, because this story is far from over. The break didn't cool things off. If anything, the tension got thicker. Reporters were buzzing outside the courtroom, legal analysts whispering that the case had just taken a brutal turn. Inside, the air was heavier, like everyone knew something had shifted.
And they were right. Once court resumed, the prosecution didn't waste a second. They brought out a new witness, someone no one expected to see this early in the trial. This witness had a calm tone, but every word they said hit like a punch. They didn't speak in riddles. They gave timelines, names, actions, things that lined up with what was already presented. And that's what made it scary. It was all starting to fit. Piece by piece, the puzzle wasn't just taking shape. It was forming a picture that looked a lot like guilt. The defense looked rattled. Notes were flying back and forth. Whispers turned into frantic exchanges. They knew they had to counter this fast. But how do you argue with a witness who doesn't flinch? One moment really stuck. The witness was asked if they ever felt threatened or pressured, and they nodded. Then added that the pressure didn't come from strangers, but from someone sitting right there in the courtroom. That hit the room like a thunderclap.
All eyes moved toward Diddy. He didn't react, at least not right away. But those who were really watching, they saw it. The shift in posture, the tight jaw, the eyes that suddenly wouldn't look forward. It was subtle, but it spoke volumes. The prosecution paused. They didn't rush to the next question. They let the silence sit. They let the jury absorb that moment. That's the kind of courtroom strategy that doesn't need to shout. It just sits with you and grows louder in your head. And as that day closed, it wasn't about who spoke the most. It was about who said the most without needing to explain. Now here's the kicker. The witness? They weren't even the prosecution's strongest piece. Not by a long shot. What's coming next? It's what the defense team privately called the part we hoped never sees daylight. Yeah, it's that serious. You might want to sit down for what's coming. Because the next move is cold, calculated, and changes everything again.
Stay close. You'll see why this trial is rewriting every rule in the courtroom playbook. By the time everyone returned the next morning, something felt different. Even before the judge entered, you could feel the shift. More security, tighter rules, a kind of silent warning that whatever was about to unfold would hit even harder than the day before. Diddy walked in behind his attorneys. The suit was sharp, but the confidence, gone. He didn't nod, didn't smile, just sat down like a man bracing for impact. The prosecution stood up, calm as ever. No dramatics, no buildup. Just a simple request to admit a new piece of evidence. This time, it wasn't a recording. It was paperwork. But not just any paperwork. It was financial. Signed documents, payment transfers, NDAs, names, dates. Every sheet was a hammer pounding away at what was left of the defense. And then came the witness tied to those records. This wasn't some vague figure from the industry.
This was someone who used to work for Diddy. Someone who had seen things from inside the mansion walls. Their face was tight, voice steady. But the words, let's just say the room wasn't breathing. They spoke about the way events were planned, who was invited, who was expected to show up. They gave details that matched what Prince said in that recording, down to the lighting in the upstairs rooms. No exaggerations, just confirmation, one after another. Connections were drawn right in front of the jury. And Diddy, he sat there, gripping the arm of his chair so hard the knuckles went white. At one point, the witness was asked why they decided to speak now. They hesitated, just for a second. Then said, because I saw what happened to Prince when he tried to warn people. And I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. No music played, no dramatic cue, just silence.
And it was louder than any reaction they'd gotten all week. The defense objected, tried to get that line struck from the record. The judge shook his head, denied. And right then, you could see it on the jury's faces. Something had changed again. They weren't just listening now, they were judging, quietly, carefully. And that's a dangerous place for any defendant to be, especially when the prosecution still hasn't played their last card. Because the next piece, the one that hasn't been mentioned yet, let's just say it's something even the defense wasn't fully prepared for. If you thought Prince's recording was intense, what's coming next is worse, because this time, it's not from the past. It's happening right now. You're going to want to hear what's next. As the judge gave the nod, the prosecution brought in something no one expected on a Thursday morning.
Live footage. Yep, real-time authenticated surveillance video, and not from years ago either. This clip was pulled from the home security system of a key witness. Time-stamped, verified, and most importantly, recent. The footage didn't show a crime in progress. It showed a conversation. But not just any conversation. It was a late-night meeting between two individuals connected to Diddy's inner circle. One of them was already on the witness list. The other, a name the public hadn't heard until that very moment. Gasps from the gallery. Whispers flared up. The judge raised a hand. Sharp, firm silence. The footage rolled on. You couldn't hear the audio, but that didn't matter. The body language, the secrecy, it screamed everything the prosecution needed it to. A lip-reading expert had been brought in earlier and submitted a written transcript of what was said. The words weren't threatening, but they were clear. Stick to the plan. Remember what we rehearsed.
That one sentence hit like a truck. It suggested someone, maybe more than one person, was coached on what to say under oath. And right there, the prosecution dropped it. Not accusations, not speculation, evidence. Now the jury wasn't just being asked to believe stories from the past. They were watching what looked like manipulation unfolding mid-trial. The defense team scrambled. They stood, objected, shouted about context. The judge reviewed the documents. Overruled. And you could feel the tension in the defense row spike like a pressure cooker. Diddy didn't stand. He didn't lash out like yesterday. But he leaned forward, elbows on the table, face in his hands. Not a power pose, not damage control. It looked like resignation. This case was no longer about isolated claims or celebrity scandal. It was about strategy, about planning, about intent.
And it was becoming harder and harder for the jury to ignore the growing mountain of connections. By the time court adjourned for lunch, a new phrase had started bouncing around the hallway. Coaching witnesses. That's the kind of phrase that sticks. The kind jurors don't forget. And just when you think the prosecution is out of surprises, they tease something that sends a ripple through the courtroom. A phone call. One that was never meant to be heard. One that could flip a testimony on its head. They didn't say who was on the call, not yet. But based on how Diddy's team reacted, it's someone important. Stick around, because once that call plays, the truth might not just come out, it might blow the lid off everything. No one really ate during lunch. Reporters picked at their food. Attorneys stayed hunched over laptops. And the jurors?
They came back in with that unmistakable look, the one people wear when they know something big is coming but don't know how bad it's going to be. Then, the moment arrived. The prosecution approached the bench with a sealed flash drive. No dramatic lead-up, just a quiet confidence that spoke louder than words. They confirmed its contents with the judge, an intercepted phone call from just 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. This wasn't a recording from years back, buried in some vault. This was fresh, raw, and painfully relevant. Once the audio started, the room froze. 2 voices, clear, distinct. One belonged to someone closely tied to the defense. The other, well, let's just say the courtroom knew the voice before the name was even mentioned. The speaker was calm at first, almost casual. But then came a phrase that changed the temperature in the room instantly. If this goes sideways, we already know who's taking the fall. That line alone sucked the air out of the room.
Then came another. They can't link it to him. As long as we stick to the narrative, we're good. It was calculated, controlled, and deeply damaging. The implication was clear. Someone was protecting Diddy. Not by defending him, but by taking the blame if things unraveled. Defense attorneys immediately objected, claimed the call was out of context, said it was vague and speculative. But the prosecution had anticipated that. They had already matched timestamps, locations, and even the phone numbers. It was real, and it wasn't vague, because just minutes later in that same recording, the speaker slipped. He said to tell them whatever keeps him clean. Boom! Now it wasn't just circumstantial. It was personal, direct. Someone was allegedly speaking on Diddy's behalf. And not just speaking, strategizing, protecting, shielding. The judge allowed the full call to play. The tone never got angry, but it dripped with strategy, like chess pieces being moved around behind closed doors.
And the jury heard every word. At one point, a juror covered her mouth. Another scribbled something down and underlined it twice. Meanwhile, Diddy didn't blink, didn't look up, just stared at the table. But you could see it in his body. Stiff, locked up, bleeding tight. His team looked like they were racing against time, passing notes, flipping folders, making calls during the recess. They knew what this meant. Because this wasn't just a bad look. It sounded like a playbook being read aloud in Kiert. And now, everyone's wondering something terrifying. How many more of these recordings are out there? The prosecution didn't answer that. They just said, "That concludes our presentation for today," and walked away like they were still holding cards no one else had seen. Stay sharp, because the next move might be the one nobody's ready for. The defense didn't wait until morning. That same afternoon, they made their move.
And it wasn't subtle. They stood up and asked for an immediate evidentiary hearing, right there in front of the jury, something rarely done mid-trial. But the goal was obvious. Create doubt fast. Shake the jury before the prosecution tightened the noose any further. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. That single word turned the courtroom into a battlefield. The defense's tone changed, softer, more emotional. They weren't arguing facts, they were painting pictures. They spoke of betrayal, of friends turned opportunists, of people who once benefited from Diddy's success suddenly rewriting history to escape their own failures. They even went personal. One of the attorneys looked directly at the juror and said, "Not everything whispered in secret is truth, and not every voice from the past deserves to rewrite a man's future." A clever line. Rehearsed, no doubt, but it landed. For a second, you could feel the courtroom shift.
The defense introduced messages, old texts, emails, private conversations that, according to them, showed key witnesses weren't always victims, but willing participants. Some of the messages were intimate, others downright explicit, and that was the point. The defense didn't care if it was messy. They just needed to blur the lines. One email stood out. A former associate of Diddy wrote, "We both knew the game. Don't pretend you didn't play it too." That line, it made jurors squirm. And for the first time in days, Diddy sat up straighter. He even looked around, made eye contact with a few faces in the jury box. It was subtle, but calculated. Then came their closer. The defense played a voicemail, a short one, just 9 seconds long. It was from a woman who had testified earlier. Her voice, laughing. "Tell them whatever makes you feel better. I'll play along if I have to." They didn't say when it was recorded, They didn't explain the context.
But again, they didn't need to. They were planting seeds of doubt, and every seed matters when you're cornered. As court wrapped for the day, it felt like a reset. Not a full comeback, but a punch thrown hard enough to make the prosecution blink. Outside the courthouse, headlines were already clashing. Diddy caught in coaching scandal. Defense fights back with new messages. It was chaos, and that's exactly what the defense wanted. But here's the thing about courtroom chaos. The truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for its next chance to speak. And based on the prosecution's quiet confidence as they're packed up for the day, they're not done. Not even close. Something's coming, and it might just turn the jury's momentary doubt into hard, unshakable conviction.
The courtroom barely had time to reset, because when the next warning arrived, the prosecution walked in like they had been waiting for the defense to open that door. And now they were about to slam it shut. Right after roll call and formalities, the lead prosecutor stood. No notes, no binder, just a single sentence. We'd like to recall one of our earlier witnesses, under oath with new evidence. That witness? The one the defense tried to discredit yesterday with an old voicemail? She walked back in wearing a simple black blazer, no expression. But when she sat down and looked the jury dead in the eye, everyone leaned forward. The prosecutor pressed play on a new audio clip. And the voice? It was the same woman. But this time, the tone wasn't laughing. It was shaking. The date? 1 day after that voicemail. I don't know what to do anymore. He's threatening to ruin everything if I don't cooperate. I feel like I'm stuck.
The prosecution had the full recording, and this time context wasn't on the defense's side. In the longer version, the same woman described being contacted by a third party, someone tied to Diddy, asking her to soften her story for the sake of loyalty. She even named the person. And guess what? That same person had appeared in the courtroom earlier, sitting behind the defense table. Suddenly, the voicemail wasn't playful. It was fear. The room chilled. The judge looked directly at the defense table, face unreadable. And the jury? They were glued to that audio. No blinking, no notes, just listening. After the clip ended, the prosecutor didn't gloat. She simply turned to the jury and said, "Now that you've heard the full truth, we ask that you forget the soundbite and remember the full story." It was a gut punch. The defense scrambled to object again. They claimed entrapment, emotional manipulation, anything they could think of.
The judge let it stand, because the rules are simple. If one side opens a door, the other gets to walk through it. And the prosecution, they didn't walk, they marched. The witness finished her testimony by saying, "I laughed in that voicemail because I was scared. Because sometimes pretending you're okay is easier than admitting you're trapped." That line landed hard, too hard to erase. And Diddy? He kept his eyes down the entire time. Not once did he look at her. Not once did he glance at the jury. The mask was back on, but this time it looked like it might crack again. As the court broke for recess, whispers started flying. Reporters typed so fast it sounded like rainfall. The phrase now circling in every legal blog? Defense trap backfired. And the prosecution? They still had one last thing to show before the day was done. Because there's another name on that witness list. One that hasn't been called yet.
And it might just be the one name Diddy never wanted to hear in court. As the afternoon session began, every seat in the courtroom was filled, not just with journalists or curious celebrities, but with legal observers who'd flown in just to witness what was coming next, because the prosecution stood up and said a name. A name that hadn't come up once during the trial. Until now. The room tensed, like a held breath. The name? Kim Porter. But not as a witness, as a subject. The prosecutor walked toward the screen and clicked a button. Up popped a document dated just months before Kim Porter's sudden death. It wasn't a legal form. It wasn't a contract. It was a personal journal entry. One that Kim had emailed to herself, encrypted, time-stamped, backed up in a private cloud server that was accessed by her estate's attorney after her passing. And with permission from her family, the prosecution had it authenticated.
This wasn't rumor. This wasn't secondhand. It was her words, and when they read them aloud, the courtroom went silent. Sometimes I feel like I know too much. I've seen things I wish I could forget, but I won't be quiet forever. When the time is right, I'll speak. It wasn't an accusation. It was a warning. A warning left behind by someone who was them, who had shared a life with Diddy, and who knew exactly how dangerous silence could be. The entry continued. If anything happens to me, know that I was ready to talk, that I wasn't afraid anymore. You could hear someone in the back row gasp. And the jury, they weren't just listening now. They were feeling it. The defense rose instantly, claimed the journal was emotional manipulation, said Kim Porter couldn't be questioned and therefore couldn't be trusted. But again, the prosecution had come prepared. They called a tech expert to the stand.
He confirmed, yes, the email was real. Yes, it was time-stamped. And yes, it had remained untouched until her lawyer opened it during estate proceedings. Not planted, not doctored, just hidden. Until now. Diddy sat motionless. His attorney leaned in, whispered something. He didn't move. Not a nod, not a blink. Just stared forward like the walls were closing in. The prosecutor ended with one line. Sometimes the most powerful testimony doesn't come from the living. It comes from the brave. Court recessed right after. No one clapped. No one spoke. People just stood, stunned. Because that wasn't just evidence, it was a message. And now the entire courtroom is asking, who else knew? Who else stayed quiet? And most of all, what happens if they decide to speak next? Tomorrow, the prosecution hints at presenting something never seen by the public before. Something visual. And if what they say is true, Diddy's trial might not just turn. It might end.
The following day, the courtroom was overflowing. Even the overflow room had overflow. Word had spread. The prosecution was about to show something. Not a document, not a voice recording, footage. Unseen, unreleased, protected by court order until now. Security tightened. Reporters were warned. No phones, no cameras. And then the lights dimmed. The lead prosecutor stood at the front, hands folded. This footage was obtained through a subpoena from a private residence. It's been authenticated by 3 independent forensic analysts. No hype, no theatrics, just calm, legal certainty. Then she clicked play. It wasn't high definition. The angle was grainy, but it didn't need to be crisp to land hard. What mattered was what and who it showed. A private party, late night, a familiar house, confirmed to be Diddy's Beverly Hills property. In the video, Diddy could be seen speaking with a group of people in what looked like a closed-off room upstairs.
No audio, but gestures said plenty. He pointed. He whispered. People moved quickly after he spoke. Then came a part that froze the entire courtroom. A young artist, face visible, expression nervous, entered the room and never re-emerged on camera. The timestamp showed nearly an hour passed before she was seen again, walking quickly, visibly shaken. The prosecutor paused the video. Your Honor, this individual is scheduled to testify next week. For now, we are showing this as supporting material to Prince's earlier claims and the witness testimonies already submitted. She pressed play again. Another clip, different night, same location, another group, same pattern. And this time, one of the men seen in the footage was the same individual caught in that intercepted phone call. The one where they discussed sticking to the plan. Now it wasn't just words, it was movement, faces, repetition. The defense rose instantly. Objection. Your Honor, highly prejudicial.
The judge asked for the prosecution's source chain. They provided it, reviewed, verified, ruled admissible. The video rolled on. Every person in that courtroom was leaning forward, not blinking, not moving, because what they were watching didn't look like a party. It looked like something else, something organized, calculated. And once the lights came back on, no one had anything to say, because the silence, that was louder than any argument. Diddy stared ahead, jaw locked tight. His attorneys whispered furiously, but the damage was visible because this wasn't testimony anymore. It was visual confirmation. And once a jury sees something, especially something that matches everything they've already heard, you can't walk it back. The prosecution closed the day with just one line. You've heard the voices. Now you've seen it with your own eyes. Court adjourned, but no one moved because everyone knew. ...
Tomorrow might be the day everything collapses. When the doors opened the next morning, something was different. Not the courtroom itself, not the lawyers, the jurors. They walked in slower, faces tighter, like the weight of what they'd seen the day before hadn't let them sleep. The judge noticed too. Before anything started, he looked at the panel and asked if they were ready to proceed. They nodded, but no one smiled. Then the prosecution did something unexpected. They didn't call a new witness. They recalled an old one. Someone who testified calmly in the first week, before Prince's recording, before the video. This time, the witness looked tired. Not nervous, not afraid, just tired of holding things in. The prosecutor wasted no time. After viewing the footage presented yesterday, do you wish to amend any part of your earlier statement? A pause. Then slowly. Yes, I wasn't completely honest. Silence.
The prosecutor gently asked, "Did Mr. Combs ever instruct you to delete or hide evidence?" His response? Yes, more than once. The defense flew out of their seats. Objection, hearsay, unsubstantiated. The judge held up a hand. "We'll allow it for now. Continue." And the witness did. He described a party in 2016, shortly after Prince's death. He was ordered to remove tapes, specifically, footage involving unapproved guests upstairs. He said he didn't ask questions. He did what he was told. Then he paused, took a deep breath, and dropped the hammer. "I didn't erase everything." Heads turned. The prosecutor asked if he still had anything in his possession. He nodded. "I gave it to my lawyer the day Prince's recording aired in this courtroom. It wasn't just footage. It was hard drives, backup logs, internal emails. Proof that surveillance wasn't just running. It was recorded, archived, and in some cases, buried. The defense was in shambles now. They demanded."
The witness finished with one line. "I stayed quiet because I was scared of losing my job. But now I know staying quiet would have cost me my soul." Boom! That was it. The prosecution rested. The courtroom didn't explode. It didn't cheer. It just sat there, stunned, soaking in what had just happened. Because the final witness wasn't a celebrity, wasn't an accuser, wasn't emotional. He was a witness who saw it all. And he was Diddy's employee by the end of the day. Legal analysts were calling it a checkmate, and the defense, they have to respond tomorrow. But the question isn't how they'll respond. Anyway, the trial resumes tomorrow, but everyone knows nothing will be the same. The ghost of a music legend just delivered the most powerful testimony possible, catching Diddy completely off guard. What's keeping industry insiders up tonight isn't just Diddy's fate. It's what else might be hiding in Prince's private vault. Who else did he name?